Right, so as an architect, I'm here to talk to you about money. Makes sense. How do I work this one back? Right. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about the Lenders Project, which does have an acronym. I think I've already clicked past it, but well, we did come up, a suitably long and convoluted acronym to give us the name Lenders, which was where we wanted to end up. As always, know where you want to end up before you start. So it's a collaboration research project between BRE, Constructing Excellence Wales, UK Green Building Council, Energy Saving Trust, University College London, Arup, Zero Carbon Hub, or their next iteration, and notably at the top, their Nationwide Building Society and Principality Building Society. Between them, the project has 16% of all mortgages within the UK represented in the group. So we think we've got a good starting point to talk about mortgages. We're part funded by Innovate UK. We managed to convince them to lend us some money, and Welsh Government, DEC and others are supportive of what we're trying to do. What I'll do is talk you through the goal, talk you through what we're doing, and then I'll talk you through some of the hoped for consequences. And I'll have to emphasize the hoped for, because we don't have control within the project to make them happen. We just hope they will. So our project goal is, if you imagine this is a mortgage, and if you imagine this is energy, we're trying to put energy into mortgages. More precisely, we're trying to demonstrate that there is a reliable link between energy information which is available at the point someone is applying for a mortgage on the property on which they're applying, and the actual fuel bills that they are going to be paying or likely to be paying. Now that may sound a bit obvious because we also will surely the EPC, but of course you'll all know, I know it's a audiences in the industry, the EPC represents the regulated energy. The fuel bills that the consumers or the mortgage borrowers are paying are their total bills. So we need a correlation between those. And the second part of the goal is to give this evidence as a robust output to the financial industry with the view to potentially replace the existing mortgage calculation methodology, or at least a very small part of it. We're not trying to change the world, and be under no illusion this is not a silver bullet, it's a nudge which will help, we think. We're fairly confident that technically this will work. We're building on an original idea that we came up with back in 2011. We did a report on that funded by Construction Excellence Wales, UK GBC and University College London. Subsequently did a more detailed report on the role of the energy bill in affordability calculations, and we got together in a truly collaborative nature to put this project together to move forward with the next step of the work. So many of you may have been through a mortgage application process since the mortgage review. That you may not have done it since. It's a little bit more rigorous than it used to be, but in essence they're all pretty much the same, and certainly the responsible lenders have been using this methodology for some time. In essence, a mortgage is granted on your ability to repay the monthly repayments. It varies a little bit between lenders. There are different colours, but that's the essence of it. So a mortgage lender, you go in and you give some form of evidence, usually a payslip or several people's payslips, to say this is our monthly household income. The lenders then make a deduction for what they think you should be able to spend on whatever you like, and that varies, as a recent report found, that varies quite a lot. But they make an allowance for your spending money, your trips to the cinema or whatever else you might do. They also make allowances for things like your council tax. They make allowances for your fuel costs. They make allowances for other bills. And when they've done all of those deductions from that top line, they then say, well, what's left is what you could afford to pay us every month to repay your capital loan. And so with a slightly more complex equation than the ones up there, but in essence what they do is they take that amount you can pay each month, they multiply it by the length of the loan that you want, they make an allowance for interest and bits and bobs like fees and risks and other like, but in essence that gives you a maximum mortgage amount, and they say we will lend you up to this amount. Many of the lenders split affordability calculations into avoidable and unavoidable costs, and they will rate those differently in amongst the details of their systems. They will say if it's an unavoidable cost, such as your council tax or your fuel bills, they'd both be deemed unavoidable. then you will be paying that, and we can't assume that you'll give it up in order to make the payment to the mortgage company. There are costs like maybe your gym membership, which they'll say, well, if it's touch and go on whether you're going to make your mortgage payment, we expect you to probably not do those spin classes or whatever it might be. Fuel costs, depending where you live in the country, fuel costs are one of the largest. They're either the largest or one of the largest of the essential costs, and that's the one that we're interested in. So that one in there. The current method for calculating fuel costs is fabulous in the sense that it sets us a really low bar that we reckon we can do better than. So the current method, without any exceptions that we have found so far, is that the mortgage institutions or companies go to the Office of National Statistics Family Spending Review, or report, I always get the name wrong, and they extract the data from that. Now that publishes every year on what people are spending for their fuel costs. Interestingly, it goes out with a survey of 10,000. It typically gets a less than 50% response rate. That survey is not targeted by property. It's targeted by socio-demographics. So we have no real idea whether it's actually coincidentally gone out to all A-rated properties or all G-rated properties. From the data, we have an idea, but it certainly is not issued as a survey on the basis of the property type which they are doing. It's issued on the occupants. And that's what it's about. It's about different representations. So it's correct for its purpose. What that shows is that fuel costs are split by income decile, and they will vary on that basis between £50 and £75 a month. Once you've taken off the extremes, you take the top 10% and bottom 10% out, the middle sector varies by about £25 top to bottom, £12.50 deviation. So that means that the method that all of the mortgage companies are using is taking on board a fuel cost per month that ranges by about £25, £12.50 each way, into their affordability calculation, with no real knowledge of to whether or not that's representative of property types, because the survey is based on data which is around people, not property. Over 25 years at 5%, give or take a bit, it's about £2,000 that difference might make. If you're at one extreme in the 89th percent or in the 11th percent, the difference you might be offered on your mortgage is potentially about £2,000, not a hill of beans. So it's not fixed, but it's not going to vary a whole lot. And of course, what we should remember is that the current method takes no account of the property at all. It's all done on what the family spending report says, which doesn't have a basis on the property, it's a basis on the people. So none of that says, actually, is it an EPCA, is it an EPCG property? It's all around the people, which is not to say that's wrong, because of course unregulated energy is a major element. So the Lenders Project is suggesting that we could be more accurate than the current methodology. And as you may agree, I think that's a fairly low bar to start from. What we're suggesting is that we do have energy performance certificates. And you will know and have already heard there are issues around EPCs. We know that they're getting better. We think actually, and I'll come on to the what ifs, we think this may even feed into it. We know that EPC properties A and B, based on the need data set that was released by government recently, 4 million homes combining energy and EPC rating, we know that fuel bills for EPCs A and B aggregated together are down at about £56 a month. Interestingly, that's the lower end of what the mortgage companies are currently assuming is everyone's bills, so they're actually probably being over-optimistic about the level of people's bills. We know, therefore, from the aggregated that A will be even lower than £56 a month. We know that F-rated properties are averaging around about £105 a month. So those alone mean that EPC property costs linked, or EPCs linked to fuel costs, get that right, are a range twice as big as the one that's currently going into the mortgage calculation. We also know that what matters to the mortgage company is the total fuel bill, not the regulated energy use, and we know those aren't the same thing, just in case anyone wasn't sure, that we didn't. So we know that we need to factor in things like occupancy, things like use of the house, whether you work from home, whether you're out all day. Those kind of factors will have an impact on unregulated energy use. So we need to make sure that the mechanism captures those factors. And yes, perhaps household income is a factor, so maybe the family spending report does have a role to play. Maybe there is if you've got more money, you spend more on energy factor that we need to look at. Some evidence that we've collected already suggests that different occupancies in different homes could be a variance of up to £90. So it could be, or possibly even more. If the EPC is really at the extremes, we could be looking at more than £90 a month. Now, over 25 years at 5%, that's starting to talk about significant lumps of money which could be worthwhile, could be enough to justify more than just relagging the hot water tank, but actually doing some meaningful works that might begin to nudge you up a band, nudge your energy performance up. Even at half that figure, 8K, you're getting into the territory where you might be able to do some significant works. Touch and go, as has been talked about already, touch and go on whether that's enough for solid wall, but it's certainly enough to do some of the smaller levels of work. So what the project is trying to do is actually make the mortgage relevant to the property on which it's lent, which at the moment the calculation doesn't take into account. And by doing that, the wonderful graphical interface we've got going on there, the fuel bill gets bigger, the amount you can repay to the mortgage company gets smaller, therefore they can offer you a smaller maximum mortgage amount. You may not wish to take the maximum, but that's the hope. The overall impact, and again this would be on a national average, the overall impact is intended to be fairly neutral. So mortgage repayment plus total fuel repayments should equate to about the same cost to the borrower. It's just that you'll be paying the energy company more or the mortgage company more depending on the EPC, depending on the, not specifically just the EPC, but depending on the calculation which starts to incorporate the energy performance certificate, the actual property's performance. We've got a graphic which the website will come up later on. You're welcome to have a look at, but that's trying to show the virtuous circle that we hope might happen out of this. The website address will come up on a slide in a minute if anyone wants to get a copy of that or have a look at it in more detail. But I'll just spend, if I've rattled through, so I think I've got enough time just about to go through the Spartan ifs, the what ifs. The project will output next spring, summer, where we hope to produce exactly what I've said, that robust methodology to more accurately predict homeowners, or potential homeowners, fuel bills, and thereby vary the mortgage on that basis. We can't make mortgage companies adopt this methodology. We can simply offer it to them and say, why wouldn't you want a more accurate method of estimating your customers' costs? Surely that's a good thing. And certainly with Nationwide, Building Society on board, with Principality on board, they've both taken very much that view that if this can be proven to be a more accurate method, why wouldn't they adopt it? And indeed, I think there's potentially a question for the Financial Conduct Authority or the Building Society's equivalent to ask the question, actually, no, really, why wouldn't you? So the ifs remain ifs, but we hope that they might be adopted. The ifs are, if this was adopted, then you may start to see two types of mortgages. You'll get new mortgages or remortgages which start to factor in the actual property's energy performance level. And when I say that, I'm using it as a sort of an umbrella term. What we won't be using is the ABCD. What we'll be doing is extracting some of the data from the energy performance certificate to get the useful bits that we need, and that's through sensitivity analysis of which factors are key. But as a rule of thumb, remember, it's bits from the EPC going in. The alternative, so one of them will be a lending basis, including the energy performance data. The other one would be a lending basis based on presumed outcomes. So we could be talking about conditions on your mortgage that aren't check the wall ties have gone or check the electrics, but they might be, actually, yes, if you think you can get this property up to a C, then we will release additional finance once you've proved it. Or perhaps more optimistically, for the more progressive mortgage companies, they may say, yeah, we accept there's a risk that you might not achieve it, but we'll lend you in order to fund it so that you can achieve it. But that, again, would be deviating into the realms of a commercial decision around their financial model rather than the evidence base. But that would be the hope, two options. So you can see, you might go in, on the left, you get offered more money for an A-rated, and on the right, you go in with a D, but you say, I think I can get it up to a B or an A, and therefore you get the mortgage release. The thing that actually originally triggered this idea back in 2011 was cutting back to some of the previous speakers where we've talked about the need to be able to identify a change in the market when a change happens in the market about valuation. So we need to spot that people are paying more for for lower energy properties and capture that in valuation, and that's completely correct, and it can only ever happen that way around. It has to happen in the market, and then it has to be caught by the valuation. Similarly, the paying through the bill approach is entirely valid, but it presumes that we can't make people pay through actually increasing the value of their property. It presumes a stable market environment whereby people don't go, hey, that's low energy, I'll pay more for that. And this was the letter that triggered the idea in my head, because I thought, well, if your bank wrote to you and said, I'm going to lend you £200,000 if you go out and buy an A-rated property, but if you buy the property next door that's F-rated and it's in the same school catchment area and it's got the same number of bedrooms and it's got the same size back garden, but it's F-rated, we'll only lend you £170,000. My bank tells me that. I start thinking, I'm going to go shopping for an A. So you start thinking this is actually more around the idea that we're nudging people to buy and therefore driving demand than it is really about the numbers. Yes, it might drive some refurbishment. Yes, it might drive all of those elements. But what we're really trying to do is get people to put a value on it so that it starts to reflect in the payments that come through. Now, so that's my dream. If a mortgage company does that, I'll be delighted. Whether they do it like that, of course, that's their implementation method. But in essence, it will be a graded mortgage offer that comes through to say, we will lend you a varying amount depending on the energy performance of the property that you're looking to buy. We think that it's possible that when mortgage companies are relying on data extracted from the energy performance certificate, mortgage companies might start to worry whether that data is any good or not. Certainly with surveyors, many of the mortgage companies have firm lists of surveyors that they expect you to use if you're getting a mortgage from them because they're the ones they trust. It's not my place to suggest that they must do this, but it may be a logical step for them to say, well, actually, we only trust these certified energy performance certificates because those are the people that we know actually deliver the right outcome. So you may start to see lists such as that from mortgage companies. You may start to see, therefore, further driving, I should say, it's already gone a long way in the right direction, on the quality of energy performance certificates. So you may start to see a positive benefit on the accuracy. If you're going out shopping for a home, then in this future world, the if world, you will get a mortgage letter from your company that says if you buy a low energy property, if all other factors are the same, we'll still lend you more money on that property because we think it's a better bet. We think you can afford to repay us more. So it doesn't affect their risk model. In essence, it's still the same net outgoing. So home buyers might conclude that they can spend more to buy a low energy property. That might lead to an increase in demand for low energy properties. That might lead, after the increase in demand is likely to trigger an increase in speed of sales and turnover, that might eventually lead to an increase in price, a differential between the bad ones and the good ones. And that's what ultimately we need to drive the money into the market. So if you're buying a home, you might go out and buy an A-rated property, but equally you might remember that your mortgage company should be hopefully offering you a mortgage that says, if you come to us with a sensible plan to get it from a F to a D, then we'll give you a condition mortgage that says when you come back with your D certificate, we'll release the extra funds. So you might actually think, I'm going to go and buy a cheaper house that I know I can bump up a few levels in order, through refurbishment work, to release some money to get the value. That great British institution of I'm going to DIY it and raise the value, and won't necessarily just be a new kitchen anymore. You may be able to drive it down the route of, I know that there's value in this, therefore I can do it. So refurbishment could get pushed. If you're selling and you no longer care whether or not your anaglypta wallpaper is 50 mil in from the wall because you're going to do the internal lining or not, because you're not precious about it as you're selling, you're thinking, right, I'm going to tart this up, maximize my sales value. You might start thinking, well, I know that the property down the road was an A-rated and that went for 20 grand more or 5 grand more or 2 grand more, depending. So that could drive you. And if you're not buying or selling, you'd still have the capacity to know that the mortgage company would give you the conditional advance if you wanted to do works which raise the energy performance. And with the underlying logic, and I'm not suggesting we're going to be proposing a golden rule, but the underlying logic being that your fuel bills would go down by roughly the amount that they would lend you. So you might choose, point of retirement's been touched on already, you might choose at that point, even beforehand, if you still need to access mortgage funds, to use those to reduce your exposure to fuel costs and effectively choose to pay that money to a mortgage company rather than an energy company. And of course, the new build sector, always much derided in the sense of whether or not they're delivering what they could or should be delivering and all the rest of it. In reality, of course, new homes are significantly better performing than the existing housing stock we've got. They're driven there by regulation. If we turned the market slightly so that there was demand, it wouldn't be regulation that was putting home builders at the top of the game. It would be the fact that customer demand was it. We'd suddenly see them, rather than dragging their heels to deliver any of these regulations, it would be, well, I sell this for more. Why the hell wouldn't I build a low energy home? So potentially the cost disincentive against low energy, because people are not yet proven to pay more, has been touched on with the valuation project, could be mitigated, maybe even reversed if one is being really optimistic. So the last slide, I've probably overrun, I usually do, apologies. We have a website if anyone does want to find out more. We've got some reports and things on there around what we're doing, some more detail about the project. There's an email link there as well. We're looking to complete next spring, summer. We're currently collecting a large data set, and this talk does end with a plea. We, in order to complete the project and prove a robust scale data set, our goal is to have more than 5,000 properties which have energy performance certificate data and occupancy data, because that's the size of the data set which the mortgage industry currently use to make this prediction. So we feel that in order to be able to go and look the Council of Mortgage Lenders in the eye and say this is a good idea, we think it's as robust as your current one, we need a data set of similar size. We're collecting that from big data holders, so Exxon, ExoServe, Elexon, government, similar bodies. We're also doing our own survey to ask individual people, if you've got fuel bills, if you've got an EPC, you don't even have to own your own property, because that doesn't actually influence it. And if you know how many people live in your house, which one hopes you do, then please do fill in the survey. Can be reached through the website there. We need to get as much data as possible to convince the mortgage institutions that this is a change they can make responsibly and prudently to improve the accuracy of the way they lend, which may then have all of those consequences. But in essence, what we're doing is trying to get them more accurate. Thank you.